Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publicists Association's Let It Be Known. It is Tuesday, April 19th, 2022. Time is flying. Gary Chambers Jr. said he is tired of his home state of Louisiana being ranked poorly when it comes to health, education, infrastructure, and the economy. The Baton Rouge native says his home state can and should perform better. He says, when I look at this state, and its people, we are so much greater than our state's ranking. Chambers goes on to say, and it's in part because of the leaders that we've had who make decisions that are against the people of this state. Chambers' bombastic style as an activist and now a Democratic challenger for the state's U.S. Senate seat has him going viral in a bid to change Louisiana's standard. Chambers, who's 36 years old, has been known for viral posts on social media calling out local politicians and fighting for communities of color. Now, Chambers is gaining attention for smoking marijuana and burning the Confederate flag in his campaign ads. We discussed that this morning with our number one correspondent, James Wright of the Washington Informer. Good morning, James. And we're going to take a look at Gary Chambers' campaign video, which has him burning a Confederate flag and smoking marijuana. Let's take a look.
The right to vote. 1 in 9 Black Americans do not have health insurance. 1 in 3 Black children live in poverty. It's time to burn what remains of the Confederacy down. I do believe the South will rise again, but this time it'll be on our terms. I'm Gary Chambers and I'm running for the U.S. Senate, and I approve this message.
James, Gary Chambers is running for U.S. Senate. He approved that message. He says it's time to burn down these things, and he is literally doing it in his campaign ads. Have you seen anything like that before?
I have never seen anything like that before. And good morning. A black man burning a Confederate flag in a southern state. Wow, we have come a long way.
And he's smoking marijuana.
And smoking marijuana. A few years ago, he might have been locked up. But it just shows you how our society has evolved. And Stacey, it's interesting. This is taking place in Louisiana. Louisiana officially is 32.4% Black, but we have to give it 3 more percentage points for the real number, which is about 35% Black. And Louisiana is the second most, has the second highest percentage of Blacks among the states. Mississippi is number 1, but we all know who is really number 1, the District of Columbia, but we can't get into that. So I'm kind of excited about what he's doing because I think he has some teeth. Keep in mind that Louisiana is one of the few southern states that has a Democratic governor. So John Bel Edwards. So there's some there, as Bob Dole once said.
Well, if elected, Gary Chambers Jr. says he hopes to change all of this stuff that's going on through supporting policies like Medicare for all, raising the national minimum wage to $15 per hour, and the Green New Deal, a federal bill that aims to reduce reliance on fossil fuels and lower greenhouse gas emissions. He wants to create jobs in clean energy and curb climate change. And that's another thing, James. We don't hear a whole lot of candidates talk about climate change.
Well, it's interesting he's doing that in Louisiana because Louisiana is still dependent on the oil industry. But we know the New Orleans area is dependent on tourism, but the state as a whole is dependent on oil. So it's dependent on the fossil fuel industry. So we have to see how that works out in terms of the Green New Deal. And I still believe Louisiana has a right to work law. So raising the minimum wage to $15, that's going to be fun. So I like the fact that he's bringing in ideas to Louisiana that they're not used to hearing. That is good. And we have to see how far he goes, but it'll be very interesting.
Yeah, I see what David Youngblood says. I'm all in on Gary Chambers. But James, though, at the end of the most recent quarter, ending in March, Chambers' campaign had raised $1.2 million, about 724,000 more than the next closest Democrat in the field, Luke Mixon. Republican incumbent Senator John Kennedy has raised more than $23 million for his campaign. Uh, James, I know money does make a difference in these campaigns, but you mentioned some things there about Gary Chambers Jr. that perhaps he can overcome this monetary deficit.
Well, we've seen it before. Money doesn't always win you a contest. And because Louisiana has a history of electing Democrats, Mary Landrieu, she served in the U.S. Senate representing Louisiana for a number of years. And like I mentioned, John Bell Edwards, in terms of the Democratic government, there is potential for him possibly to do well. He would do well also to try to tap into the young people in Louisiana, particularly in the New Orleans metropolitan area, and as well as in the Baton Rouge metropolitan area with LSU and Southern. So I think there is a chance for him really to win this race. From my understanding, John Kennedy is not hated, but he's not loved. So Louisianans can deal with him and they can deal not with him. And so I think that gives Gary Chambers a chance. And I like the fact that he has distinguished himself, not in ways I would, such as smoking dope or, but in a way I would, burning the Confederate flag. So he has definitely an identity.
Well, and James, so that identity, so that leads to my next point here, James. Do you think he'll be able to, if he's the win, do you think he'll be able to keep that identity? Do you think he'll be able to sit in the U.S. Senate and say, you know what, I'm going to call Snoop Dogg and we're going to sit here and we're going to smoke a blunt together?
I like to think that he may become the black, and I hate saying things like this, but he may become the black Paul Wellstone. You remember the Minnesota senator who was ultra liberal, and he would wear his jacket. I mean, when he would get on the floor, he would have a tie, but he would wear his jacket and an open collar and that sort of thing. I don't know whether Gary Chambers will be like that, but I think that he can bring some issues such as raising the minimum wage, and particularly the Green New Deal, that will open some eyes here in Washington, D.C. He may not be embraced by the Nancy Pelosi's or the Chuck Schumers completely, but he will open up a dialogue that needs to be had within the Democratic Party. That's for sure.
Well, in the Green New Deal, we know even the Democrats have been a lot of pushback against that. That's a Bernie Sanders thing. Some say it's a AOC thing. Some say, but when you look at the Green New Deal and you look at other proposals that have floated, it tends to make some sense, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And this is why you see the oil companies such as ExxonMobil and BNP quietly moving to get their hands into cleaner fuel, such as solar, wind, and that's why they're making those moves. But here's the thing, Stacey, the Green New Deal is going to happen. It's going to happen eventually. Fossil fuels, people are just worn out about fossil
Yeah,
fuels.
it's going to happen because it has to happen, right?
Yes, it has to happen. And people are just tired of fossil fuels. They're tired of coal. They're tired of this pollution. So it's going to happen. And we just have to get used to it, include the Democratic and the Republican Party.
Well, James, here's a topic that's sure to get the blood boiling. An estimated 10,000 Detroit residents, the majority of them Black, were displaced from their homes between 2010 and 2016 as the result of the city's illegal inflation of property taxes by at least, get this, $600 million. Residents have yet to be compensated. Now, local homeowner advocates are amplifying overtaxed residents' calls for repayment and released a survey report detailing their preferred compensation methods. Reportedly, the city violated a law in the Michigan Constitution by assessing properties at 55 to 85% of their market value during the 6-year span. The statute prohibits properties from being assessed above 50% of their market value. More than 5 years have passed, James, since the city admitted to the overtaxing scheme, prompting renewed calls for compensation from the Detroit-based Coalition for Property Tax Justice. James, this, you talk about systemic racism, you talk about injustice. this was done mostly to Black homeowners in the city of Detroit.
Hmm. You know, Stacey, I'm gonna answer your question this way, and I'm gonna be kind of coy about it. Have you seen downtown Detroit? It is downtown Detroit is beautiful. Has these
Mhm.
beautiful hotels, these beautiful buildings, these nice restaurants, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful place to be in downtown Detroit by the river. And guess who is paying for that? The Black people. And the Detroit City Council, even though it's majority Black, knew what it was doing in terms of enacting these laws, in terms of these overassessment. Black people tend to be underassessed in terms of the prices of their homes, not only in Detroit, but almost everywhere.
Oh
And
yeah.
now, yeah, and now they're really paying for it. But what people have to understand in Detroit is that not only are they being displaced, those properties are going to go to people who don't look like you and me to make Detroit more beautiful and to extend that beauty westward in the city. And that is just completely and totally wrong.
Well, all these years have passed, and it's been uncovered and proven that what Detroit, what the officials did there was illegal, and yet these residents, many of them have been displaced. There's no compensation. They have not compensated these residents, and again, as the coalition reported, we're talking about a vast majority of African Americans,
Yep.
and as it is, and you pointed out. The assessments are usually low, right? Or the values are appraised low on houses, lower than normal. We've heard the stories of what happens when someone comes to a Black household to appraise the value, and now we see something like this where the city intentionally and illegally overtaxed these residents to the point where they lost their homes, and it was illegal. So it has to, the federal government maybe has to step in here, James.
They have to. The federal government definitely should. And so do the congressional representatives, the senators need to step in and to put a stop to this. There's so much going on in Michigan. You're still dealing with the water problem in Flint. And so, in terms of the Black people, they're kind of like under attack. In this particular situation, what you didn't mention this, but you're well aware that in Detroit you have a lot of abandoned homes,
Mm-hmm.
and those abandoned homes are not generating revenue for the city. And so I guess city leaders thought that they had to do something in order to get more revenue into the city, which makes sense, but you don't have to do it on the backs of Black people. And that's the problem with this country. When we are under assess or in some type of recession or depression, it is the Black people that ultimately pay the price. And that's not right.
Yeah, it's give assessing them with an 85%. That is just that's horrible, James. Paris Brown writes in that raising taxes is one way to gentrification, and you mentioned this before, James, of comparing what happened in D.C. But you also just made an interesting point talking about the abandoned homes. There have been
Yeah.
TV shows about that, or TV news reports about that, I should say, all the abandoned homes. Um, but this situation added to that.
Well, see, I have to be full disclosure. I actually looked into buying one of those abandoned homes in Detroit. It is
They were selling
just
them for
that
$100
cheap,
at one point.
just that cheap. You're absolutely right. And so, and I don't think you had to be a Michigan resident. So this is just really a horrible situation that the greater Detroit Chamber of Commerce needs to do something about. The Michigan legislature needs to do something about. And as you alluded to, our federal officials really need to look in and, if necessary, compensate those people who were severely underassessed.
Yeah, it's it is really appalling to think that this continues to go on, and here we are in 2022 with all these issues, James, and as you eloquently stated, Black folks continue to be under attack, and we are joined now by the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publicists Association. Good morning, Dr. Benjamin Chavis Jr., how are you?
Good morning, Stacy, and good morning, James.
Good morning.
Um,
Morning.
and shout out to all of our beloved brothers and sisters in Detroit, Michigan. It's one of our great cities. One of our board of directors, Hiram Jackson, who is the president and CEO of Real Times Media, that owns the Michigan Chronicle, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Chicago Defender, the Atlanta Tribune, and the Atlanta Daily World. Um, and we have other African American owned newspapers also in Michigan. Detroit is the home of General Motors, one of our sponsors. It is James rightly said it's a great city, but it has also great problems, and that's why we in the Black press are focusing on this because what is going on in Detroit is not isolated to Detroit. This is a national problem. Sometimes we're underassessed, sometimes we're overassessed. At the end of the day, the economic um, potential of our community somehow always gets triaged. Sometimes doesn't get serviced. Gentrification instead of urban development is urban removal. We've been removed from our communities. We're losing land by the thousands of acres a day. I'm talking about Black Americans, people of African descent are losing land in America. It's almost like an American apartheid that seeks to. Uh, um, uh, I started to use another verb, but I would say take away one of the most precious things that we've labored so hard to own, and that is land. And
Yeah.
that is, parcels of land that have been passed on from generations to generations. Even though we never got the 40 acres and a mule, we struggled since the Civil War, since post-construction, reconstruction. And, this is 2022. This is not the 1930s and 1940s. And so as we look at these cities now, including Detroit, we need our plan of self-determination. We need a plan of self-empowerment. And that's why the 195th anniversary of the Black Press this year is so very important. Where we have to remind our brothers and sisters of our long struggle for freedom, justice, and equality, and how that applies. I don't think we should repeat the past. We have to learn from the past.
Mhm.
But learning from the past, you've touched on something, Stacey and James, that we all need to pay attention to, and that is the economic inequities. When we talk about systemic racism, we very rarely talk about the economic consequences of systemic racism.
Yeah, it's true. Well, the Black Press doesn't just bring you news to make your blood boil, as we said at the top. We also bring you some good news, and this is good news for African American business owners. They were one of the hardest hit groups at the beginning of the pandemic, as we know, with the number of self-employed people dropping 31% from the first quarter of 2020 to the second, according to the census data compiled by a research associate at the University of California in Santa Cruz. But now this group is making a comeback. Just over 1.2 million African Americans were self employed in February of 2022, compared to slightly under 1.1 million in February of 2020. Another study from the website domain company GoDaddy found that Black owners have accounted for 26% of all websites created for new businesses since the pandemic began, compared to 15% before. The gains are greater than what other demographic groups have seen. So, good news there, Dr. Chavis and James. We're seeing a lot of African American entrepreneurs since the pandemic.
That is good news. And a lot of them are Generation Z and millennials. And a lot of them are second or third, where brothers and sisters change their careers who are over 50 and have become entrepreneurs. And a lot of them have been in, I would say, working for corporate America and decided, given all their years of experience, they're going to go into business for themselves. And that's a great thing. And some of these are family owned businesses. I
Yeah.
want to really shout out that the heart and substance of if you look at the history of Black businesses in America, they started out as family businesses
Right.
on the farm and then in the cities. And I just want to encourage all of our listeners, think about who you can go into business with in your own family,
Mhm.
in your own community, in your own church, in your own social setting, in your own fraternity, in your own sorority. We have all these connections, but sometimes we don't think about how to do business with one another
Right.
and how to keep that dollar circulating in our community, James and Stacy.
Yeah.
But James, also, this comes on the heels of the multiple reports talking about how people have quit their jobs.
Mhm.
It was the Great Resignation, is what they've been calling it, but we're seeing something on the other side of that, right? Particularly with African American entrepreneurs. And as Dr. Chavis alluded to, and the statistics bore out what he said, that many of them are young, millennials, and younger, right? So give us, James, your take. I know you've done some reporting on this. What have
Mhm.
you found in Washington, D.C.?
Well, you all mentioned some very important demographic groups, but you missed one: women. Black women are opening up businesses at a phenomenal rate. And while this was continuing on before the pandemic, it really shot up during the pandemic because a lot of these sisters realized they hit a glass ceiling, or they were laid off, or they were just outright fired. And instead of saying, let me go get another job, I'm going to start my own business, just as Dr. Shavis just alluded to, people doing business with each other. I think the pandemic has opened the eyes to people that maybe I need to change my life. Stacy, you and I, to some extent, Dr. Chavis, we grew up in an era where you got an education and then you go out and get a job. You don't open a business, you go out and get a job.
Yeah.
And now that dynamic doesn't work anymore because the job is not going to be there, or that the job you may not even want. So now people are looking at entrepreneurship. And as women take a more prominent role in our society, entrepreneurship among them will also be the case. And that's one of the exciting things about it. Black women are opening up their own businesses. That's happening in Washington, D.C., big time, and I suspect in other places also.
Yeah, absolutely. And James, to go along with your point, I'm reading what David Youngblood wrote in. He says because young people are saying the traditional workplace is not for them. 40 hours a week for 40 years for someone else. No thanks. And that's really, I've heard that. I've heard young ones, James, because like you said, when we were coming up, it was about get yourself a good job,
Mm-hmm.
stay there 30 years and
Mm-hmm.
retire, get a pension.
That's
And,
right.
and and what David is saying here is the younger ones, Dr. Chavis, I guess you alluded to that as well. The younger ones are saying, no, thank you. We see a different way, perhaps even a better way. Um,
Well,
Dr. Chavis?
we're encouraged by the entrepreneurship of Generation Z and millennials. If I could just use myself as an example, when I was coming up, James is right. That was the worldview. But when you're in the freedom movement, the worldview changes very early. I had my own business when I was 18 years old. Why? Because I was also married, had a kid, and I was in the movement. How was I? So I opened up my own restaurant, soul kitchen, club, and I financed not only my family, but I took care of the Eastern North Carolina Civil Rights Movement out of that one business.
Mm-hmm.
Because back then, business and fighting for freedom were aligned. And that's where, if you look at the 195 years of the Black press, and I want everybody to go to NMPA events.com. Please go register for our convention
Oh.
because we're going to have an array of Black women leaders, Black women business leaders, brothers business leaders at our convention in New Orleans, a great city, planning our convention this June. Please come. We're going to be at a great hotel, but we're going to be discussing all these issues: entrepreneurship, the next level. What is the future of the Black press of America after 195 years? What are the economic opportunities? What are the entrepreneurial opportunities? What are the journalistic opportunities? All that's going to be dealt with at our convention in June.
Well, and Dr. Chavis, again, you hit it on the head too. You think about the Black press, and you think about the 230 some odd newspapers and media companies within the Black press. the overwhelming majority of them, if not all of them, are family businesses, right? Individual businesses that have been passed down from generation to generation in some cases, and in some cases, the younger ones have taken over. We see certainly places like Dallas, where Patrick Washington has taken over the Dallas Weekly there, a young guy here in Washington, D.C. at the Informer. You have the Bridge, where Lafayette Barnes, Denise Rolock Barnes' son, has basically taken over that. And we see that throughout. Karen Carter Richards, our chair in Houston, her children have been groomed as well to take over that business. So we are seeing that within the Black press, what we're talking about with Black businesses. James, I know you have a bird's eye view of what goes on there at the Informer.
Yes, and it's very interesting to see that, because you see that nationwide. You talked about Karen Carter Richards. She got that fantastic newspaper from her parents, particularly her mother, which is considered one of the leading newspapers, Black newspapers in Texas. And Stacey, you really hit the point. These young people they're not going to just sit in an office for 40 years and then get a gold watch and be happy with a pension that you find out can't really sustain you. So they're going to go out here, and they're doing that now. And, Lafayette Barnes is a good example of that with the Bridge, in terms of generating support among millennials and Generation Z for his publication. But he's not alone. There are a number of people doing that around the country. And I want to stress this. This is the direction the young people are looking at. They're not doing what we did, which was to get a job and be happy. They're creating jobs, and they are happy.
Yeah, they are certainly doing that too. When we talk about giving back, that's a definition, right, Dr. Chavis, of giving back. By you open up a business, you're creating jobs in the community.
Oh, absolutely. And well, I'm going to go back even to 1980s with the evolution of hip hop. Hip hop now is 50 years old. And you have all these young brothers and sisters who put their talent into their own businesses, into their own labels, into their own distribution companies. Same thing in gospel. While we sang a lot, now we're starting to own our own gospel labels for the first time, our own gospel publishing, getting our own publishing rights. We have many more brothers and sisters now becoming authors. They're self-publishing. That's entrepreneurship. So I think this climate, as the American economy, even though I want to just caution everybody, COVID has not ended yet. Don't relax too quick, because there's some other variants out there. But the truth is, the economy is getting ready to take off, and we got to make sure that African Americans, that we're not spectators to somebody else gaining wealth, and while we stay in poverty. Entrepreneurship is one way out of poverty.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't forget, again, Dr. Chavis already mentioned NNPA/events.com. You can register. The hotel is phenomenal. Dr. Chavis was with our leadership there, Executive Administrator Claudette Perry, the chair, Karen Carter Richards, over the weekend. And they report back that the hotel is absolutely top notch. It's spectacular. And I mentioned that because if you go to that website and if you want to come to New Orleans, the rate that they're giving right now is phenomenal. Go check it out. You wouldn't believe the discounted rate that's available for the NNPA's national convention. So go to NNPA/events.com and you can register and come join us, because it's going to be a fun time in New Orleans. Thanks so much for watching Let It Be Known. Please can't even speak this morning. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and continue to stick with us as we bring you news and information that you'll only hear in the Black press, the way we give it to you. Thanks so much. We'll see you tomorrow.